social epistemology, as we've discussed, is broadly interested in the characteristics of effective and dysfunctional knowledge communities. Social epistemology emerged from what is now called science studies. Science studies is an interdisciplinary field that studies the history and practice of science, and it really looks in at the details of how scientific practice actually works. What do scientists look like when they're doing science? So these are people who looked at the philosophy of science or at the study of science in general, and they said, hey, you know, there's a lot of abstract theory out there about the nature and method of science, but how does science actually work in practice? And you get sociologists, anthropologists, historians, and philosophers coming together to do this sort of fine-grained analysis, a really close look at the details of what scientific practice actually looks like. So science studies also gave rise to a new philosophy of science, and we're going to talk about both and kind of the back and forth relationship between the two of them. For a long period, the philosophy of science typically involved the abstract analysis of scientific reasoning and the scientific method and the nature of scientific evidence. But out of science studies, a new philosophy of science emerged, one that attempts to place these philosophical concerns in conversation with knowledge about the way science works in practice. So you get this really interesting interdisciplinary collaboration between sociologists, anthropologists, philosophers, political scientists, and so on. And as we turn to the philosophy of science, we're going to be focusing on something that's been a really important theme throughout our conversations, namely trust. We've already seen how important trust is for any functional knowledge community. Remember Wynn's argument. Modern knowledge depends on long chains of experts. No individual could ever hope to master the entire body of knowledge involved in that long chain. So to know anything as individuals, we have to be able to trust other members of our knowledge community. So there are no excellent knowers outside excellent knowledge communities. So you could master all of the intellectual virtues, but if you're in a scenario where the entire community lacks genuine knowledge, then having the epistemic virtues won't help you. If you're in a bad epistemic community, it doesn't matter how epistemically virtuous you are. Now we're turning our attention to the importance of trust when it comes to science. Why Trust Science? That's the book we're looking at by Naomi Oreskes. So this is a book that grew out of her Princeton University Tanner lectures that she gave in 2016. And she's taking a really close look at this question. What makes scientific knowledge worthy of our trust? And here's how she frames the problem. Many people, she says, are confused about the risks involved in vaccination, the causes of climate change, what to do to stay healthy. And then there are scientists, immunologists. They say, hey, vaccines are safe for most people. They protect us from deadly, disfiguring diseases, and they don't cause autism. Atmospheric physicists tell us the buildup of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere warms the planet, driving sea level rise and extreme weather events. And dentists tell us, for example, it's good to floss your teeth, keeps your gums healthy. But how do they know these things? And moreover, how do we know that they're not wrong? We know these things are contested in the media and on the internet. We know scientists sometimes make mistakes. We know experts often disagree. And we know that scientific truth is historically unstable. Things that they were absolutely certain about 100 years ago, they now think are totally false. So in the face of all that, why should we trust science? What makes science unique? What makes science particularly worthy of our trust? This is a very timely issue. Science is currently confronting a major crisis of public trust. Corporations and other entities with financial or ideological interests manufacture doubt to derail science-driven politics. This is something that Naomi Oreskes has written a lot about, something she's famous for. She co-authored the book Merchants of Doubt, about people who are trying to foster doubt about climate change science. To take just one example, the American Enterprise Institute. This is a privately funded think tank in Washington, D.C. Rich people who own corporations fund the think tank. They're committed to laissez-faire economics, which is to the advantage of the rich people who fund the think tank. They're committed to market-based mechanisms for social problems, which is to the advantage of people who fund the think tank. They're committed to small government and low taxes, which are also advantageous to the rich people who fund the think tank. And this group has systematically disparaged the scientific consensus about climate change, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the so-called IPCC. The IPCC was established in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Program to assess climate change based on the latest science. It involves thousands of experts from around the world synthesizing the most recent developments in climate science. And the American Enterprise Institute has called the IPCC an interest group, no different ex ante than researchers funded by the petroleum industry. So Oreskes wants to take this challenge seriously. She wants to answer the question, should a scientific analysis be taken as authoritative ex ante? What is the appropriate basis for trust in science anyway? If we cannot answer the question of why we should trust science, and this is a quote from Oreskes, or even if we should trust it at all, then we stand little chance of convincing our fellow citizens, much less our political leaders, that they should get their children vaccinated, floss their teeth, and act to prevent climate change. So here's a spoiler alert. The view that Oreskes ultimately takes in this book is that the consensual view of science, the view that scientific knowledge is fundamentally consensual, can help us answer this question about why we should trust science.